There have been reports of airstrikes in Syria overnight, despite the fact a truce to end fighting in the 5-year civil war came into effect over the weekend. But we mustn't be too down on this. It's the most successful so far. The airstrikes took place in the Aleppo region, where ISIS, which of course is not a signatory to the ceasefire, is still active. So can this ceasefire, what we have of it, last, and what will happen now? Joining me is Otago University international relations expert Robert Patman. Robert, good morning to you.
Good morning, Paul.
It would be easy to be down on this and say it's a disaster because there is still fighting in Syria. But would it be fair to say it has been more successful than many people thought it would be?
Yes, I think it is, but it's precarious, as your comments indicated, and we should be quite clear about this. This is a limited truce, Paul, which excludes two terrorist groups, ISIS and al-Nusra, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate. So all the parties to this agreement understand that those two groups are not part of the agreement, so hostilities will continue. But the worry for the Americans and the Western world is that Russia and the Assad regime have always defined terrorists as including those moderate groups who are simply opposed to Assad.
All right, so the big concern for the Americans is that any kind of ceasefire like this actually plays into the hands of Russia and Assad because they can reasonably, under their own terms, still fire at large chunks of Syria.
I think that's the fear, but I think there's, if you look at the Americans, John Kerry has said he's not holding his breath about this agreement, but he believes it's worth trying. But the Americans have also said, the Secretary of State has alluded to a plan B, which I think is a bit of a warning to the Russians that if they do not do their part in upholding this limited truce, that the Americans reserve the right to take unspecified action, which probably means stepping up their military involvement in Syria. And remember, as Mr. Obama came quite close to that in 2013 over the use of chemical weapons in Syria.
All right, Robert, given that this conflict has been going pretty much with no pause at all for 5 years, this is the best we've come to anything remotely approaching a ceasefire.
Definitely. Yeah.
What happens with this now? How can the world parlay this into something more permanent?
Well, there's the hope that Assad and the other groups, 97 opposition groups which are party to this agreement, that it can become the foundation for resumed discussions in Geneva under the co-chairmanship of Russia and the United States to finally bring about a political settlement. In other words, if you can get a process going, it might have substantive results down the track. But that's a very, it's an ambitious goal, but it's worth trying. After all, that we've seen in the last 5 years more than 250,000 people killed, mainly civilians, and something like half the Syrian population dislodged, or removed from their homes. So, it's worth trying.
All right, thinking less about Syria for a moment and more about the relationship between Russia and the United States, to what extent has this been a positive thing, the fact that they have had to sit down and negotiate together?
What I find interesting, Paul, is the fact that Mr. Putin has agreed to this at this stage when his support for the Assad regime has helped the Assad army do so well against its opponents. Clearly, the economic pressures on Mr. Putin should not be discounted here. The Russian economy has gone 2 years without growth and is now facing a major austerity program. And these sort of military adventures are very expensive. So Mr. Putin, although he's had success in backing Assad, is probably quite pleased that he's now got to the top table with the Americans and is beginning to give some substance to his claim that Russia is a great power again.
Robert, I thank you very much for joining us with your analysis. Robert Patman, Otago University international relations expert.